we'll have like 3 hours together. Then we'll kind of break it up here and there with, please tell me something about yourself. We'll go ahead and get started this morning. Make the most use of our hour. Also, I usually like to start us off with a joke, which has nothing to do with pathology, usually. So, my joke for today is, what do you call, what do you call a lazy baby kangaroo?
Oh, I like that. Sloppy Joe?
Sloppy Joe, no. That's a good one. What do you call a lazy baby kangaroo? A couch potato. Alright. Okay, so we'll get started. If you have questions at any time, just raise your hand and ask. If I can answer it, I will. If I can't, I will look it up. Everybody has this, right? Yeah. Alright. So, a lot of the first part is just overview of general things like that, just the basics that you need to know. There's a lot of words. I tried to minimize the slides so it's less wordy and more to the point definitions. So first thing is oncology. Oncology is the study of or science of neoplastic growth. Onco basically means growth or tumor. Okay, so the study of tumors. Tumor technically means swelling. So anything really that's swelling is called a tumor, but it's mostly used only to refer to neoplasms. Okay. Neoplasia is the mass of cells that compose the neoplasm. Kind of common sense stuff. Neo means new, plasia means growth. And so a neoplasm is a new abnormal growth or mass of tissue whose growth rate exceeds and is uncoordinated with that of the normal tissue. It serves no useful purpose, and neoplasms tend to not listen to the body's demands to stop. So they just keep going no matter what. Benign tumors usually get to a certain point and stop, but malignant tumors have a tendency to continue to grow. They've lost their mechanism to respond to apoptosis and other inhibitory stimuli. All right? Okay, so cancer. Cancer is only used when you're talking about malignant neoplasms. You don't call anything other than a malignant neoplasm a cancer. Okay? When we're talking about tumors, you'll frequently hear terms like poorly differentiated or well differentiated. So the more differentiated it is, the more it is mature, the more mature it is. A lot of times malignant neoplasms will be de-differentiated or anaplastic. So to read the definition, differentiation is the development of immature cells into mature cells. And anaplasia technically means to form backwards, and it's the tendency of a neoplasm to be composed of less differentiated cells or immature cells. That's supposed to be less differentiated / less mature cells. Okay. Metastasis is when a malignant and only malignant neoplasms metastasize. So metastasis is when a neoplasm is displaced from its original site of origin and goes to a distant site. All right, so the biggie, and what every clinician wants to know, and anybody that has a tumor or neoplasm is it benign or malignant? So benign means innocuous, not really going to hurt you. So these tumors tend to grow slowly, are always well differentiated. They cannot metastasize, and they are usually non-life threatening unless they're somewhere where just their presence is causing a problem, like in the brain, and they can't expand beyond the skull. Malignant neoplasms tend to grow rapidly. They do not have to be poorly differentiated, but they usually are. They have the potential to metastasize, and frequently they can cause death of the host, particularly if it's identified late in the course of disease, or if you already have evidence of vascular metastasis or vascular neoplastic emboli. So, And then we're just gonna kind of talk about each again. So a benign neoplasm is said to be benign when its cytologic and gross characteristics are considered relatively innocent. Basically, cytologic characteristics, because you may see a mass that looks very, just a single little mass, but it's important to do a biopsy to confirm that those cells are benign, even though it may look benign at the moment. So it could be an early malignant neoplasm. Benign tumors usually remain localized. They do not spread to other sites, generally amenable to local surgical removal, and typically not fatal unless growing in the critical area. Things we already said. Repeating some of the same things, malignant tumors are collectively referred to as cancers. They're kind of like a crab that's constantly clawing its way through. They adhere to any part they can seize. They can invade and destroy adjacent structures and spread to distant sites or metastasize, and they can be fatal in many cases. So this is just a depiction of a benign versus a malignant tumor diagram. So these tumors can be of the exact same cell of origin. I think an example. So like a fibroma versus a fibrosarcoma, and we're going to talk about the term sarcoma, carcinoma, So the same cell of origin can either be benign or malignant. So this is an example of a benign tumor. Usually, oftentimes it's encapsulated, or at least well circumscribed, or that it's not invasive, non-invasive. And expansile, benign tumors tend to push things away rather than eat their way through things. And this would be an example of malignant tumor that's just spreading everywhere. And another feature of malignant tumors, particularly of epithelial cell origin, and epithelial cells rest on a basement membrane, is that their ability to invade the basement membrane. So that's how it starts to get from within its epithelial layer to other sites. Okay. So all tumors, and actually all tissues really, have a parenchyma and a stroma. So if you hear the term parenchyma, they're referring to the cellular component, the parts of the neoplasm, the cellular parts of the neoplasm. Not so much the supporting stroma or foundation that they're in and that they're growing in, but the actual cells that make up the neoplasm are called the stroma. The parenchyma. Got it? Okay. And anytime we talk about neoplasms, in our mind, we look under the microscope and we say, is this an epithelial neoplasm, a mesenchymal neoplasm, or a round cell neoplasm? So we look at the features of the cell to determine if they're epithelial cells, or mesenchymal cells, or round cells. So your epithelial cells, you already know what your epithelial cells are. So what are your epithelial cell types? Squamous epithelium, cuboidal, columnar, basically. And there's also transitional, pseudostratified. So those are your epithelial cells. So basically anything else is going to be mesenchymal cells. So fibrocytes, chondrocytes, osteocytes, what else? There's others. Those are the top ones that come to my mind. All right? So once you know epithelial cells, anything else is basically a mesenchymal cell, other than round cells. So epithelial, mesenchymal, round. Round cells, what are your examples of round cells or round cell tumors? And most of them are of leukocyte origin. So if you just go through your leukocytes, you can name your round cell tumors. So what are some you think of? Did y'all hear multiple myeloma? So what cell type is multiple myeloma? Plasma cells. So plasma cell tumor, which is basically B lymphocyte. What else? Lymphoma, yep. And lymphoma can be of T or B cell origin. When it's more immature B cells, it's B cell lymphoma. But once it's plasma cell, then you call it plasmacytoma, even though they're B cells. So you can say T cell lymphoma, B cell lymphoma, plasmacytoma when it's more mature, or multiple myeloma when it's everywhere, including the bone marrow. Okay, what else? about your macrophage line. What's the macrophage originating tumor called? So what's it called? What's the tissue macrophage called? Like when it's in the tissue, what do you call it? Yeah, I heard it. I can't tell you. Yeah, so histiocytomas. Or yes, ma'am.
What about gliomas in the brain?
No, so that's kind of another class of tumors actually. That's a ectoderm tumor, neuroendocrine tumor. So then you have those, which actually so ectoderm is derived, neurons and neural cells are derived from the ectoderm, so technically they're more of an epithelial cell, but they actually, and I didn't even think to include them, they kind of are in their own classification of neuroendocrine tumors. Okay, so we can talk about those too. But those cells are round, but they're not like they're not called round tumor. All right, so histiocytoma, histiocytic sarcoma. Let me see if there's anything else. I think that's it. So those are your round cell tumors. All right, and then of course you can get your leukemias, which can be basically anywhere within the hematopoietic cell line. Okay. So then you have the parenchyma and the stroma. So the stroma is made up of the connective tissue that these cells are residing in. You have to have a stroma because that's where your nutrients and blood supply comes from. And you have to have a framework to grow on. So if you just have a cell sitting there, there's no way for it to do anything. Like if it's in a petri dish, so you need stroma. So stroma, as we just said, is crucial to the growth of tumors since it carries the blood supply and provides a framework for the cells to grow. The tumor name is based on the parenchyma, not the stroma. Usually the stroma is going to be like fibrovascular. That's the most common type of stroma. It could be a myxomatous matrix or stroma. Okay. So this is just an example. This wasn't even, I just got this offline. This wasn't even a tumor, but this is just showing the cell constituents of tissue. This could be a tumor. It could be like a benign tumor. But so the parenchyma is the cellular component. So these are all cells. I don't even know what type of cells these are. It may be glandular. The focus is off, but you can still see the fact that these are cells and this is stroma. Okay, so this is like fibrovascular stroma. So fibrous connective tissue and vessels. Most common stroma you'll see. Okay, so in naming tumors, or we're just going to talk about the nomenclature. When naming tumors, they usually either have an oma on the end, a sarcoma on the end, or the suffix, or a carcinoma. Y'all know the difference between a carcinoma and a sarcoma?
Remind me.
Is carcinoma soft tissue? And sarcoma is
Close. Okay, so we'll just go over it. So, first of all, most things in an oma are going to be benign, regardless of the origin. It really doesn't tell you anything about the origin, okay? So, like papilloma is epithelial origin. Fibroma is mesenchymal origin. It just means, usually, not always, it usually means benign. Carcinoma is a malignant tumor of epithelial cell origin. So like squamous cell carcinoma, adenocarcinoma, meaning a malignant tumor of glands, okay? And sarcoma is a malignant tumor of mesenchymal cell origin, such as fibrosarcoma, leiomyosarcoma, smooth muscle, malignant tumor, rhabdomyosarcoma, striated muscle malignant tumor, okay? So non-epithelial cell and malignant. Mesenchymal malignant tumor is sarcoma. And these are some examples. Fibroma.
Could you explain that one more time?
Sure. So malignant tumors of epithelial cell origin are called carcinomas. So if you pick any epithelial cell tumor, like if it's a malignant tumor of the urinary bladder, and you know the urinary bladder is lined by transitional cell epithelium, what do you think the name would be?
Okay, so will that be transitional? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Transitional cell carcinoma,
Okay.
and that applies across the board. Malignant tumors of mesenchymal cell origin end with the suffix sarcoma. Did I say mesenchymal cell origin?
Yes.
Okay, I was like, in my mind. Okay? Is everybody clear on that? Okay. Chondro means cartilage. So chondroma would be a benign tumor of cartilage. So it would be a malignant tumor of cartilage. Anybody?
What was the question?
What would be, so I said a benign tumor of, composed of cartilage is called a chondroma. What would be a malignant tumor? Sarcoma, because it's a mesenchymal cell. There you go. Okay, so tumors are classified on the basis of their microscopic and sometimes their growth patterns or by their cell of origin. So there are some things you can look at grossly and tell exactly what it is, and we're going to go over those. So an adenoma, adeno means gland. So anytime you see the word adeno, it means the cell is of glandular origin. So adenoma is a benign epithelial neoplasm producing glands or derived from glandular cells, and adenosarcoma would be malignant. One of the, yes, there's two people. You can go ahead in the back.
So we only classify them as malignant if they're secreting or because can benign.
If they're what?
If they're secreting hormones or like hormones, but if they're benign or space occupying and you get detrimental effects because of that, they're still classified as benign.
Yep, so benign versus malignant is mostly determined based on the microscopic characteristics of the cell. And actually, as far as functional differentiation, where they're secreting their hormones, that's more likely to occur in a benign tumor because malignant tumors are usually poorly differentiated or anaplastic. And usually cells can only function as they're intended to as they mature. So if you have a poorly differentiated malignant tumor, you're probably actually not going to secrete whatever its hormones are unless it's a well-differentiated malignant tumor. And even though all benign tumors are well-differentiated, you can also have malignant tumors that are well-differentiated. So it's not so much about the, what did you say? So grossly, you can have an idea. If you see a tumor spreading everywhere, you already know it's going to be malignant, but you're still going to send it off to see exactly what it is. What are the cell features? Is it a high grade or a low grade? And all that is determined by what you see under the microscope and what these cells look like. Okay, did that answer your question? I feel like there was something else I needed to say, but I kind of lost it. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
That was my question.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. Oh, and so speaking of adenomas or adenocarcinomas, one of the most common adenomas we see are mammary gland tumors. So if I have a mammary gland tumor in the dog, I'm going to call it a mammary gland adenoma if it's benign, and adenocarcinoma if it's malignant. And we'll go over like the features that you see to determine one or the other. And one of the things, and also, so histology or histopathology is usually the, what do they call it? The golden standard of diagnosis. So I feel like there's something more to it.
It's a gold standard.
Gold standard for diagnosing? Okay, great. But what you can do in the meantime, so let's say you have a case, you know, you want at least some idea, is this infectious? Is it neoplastic? Do I need to put my antibiotics? Is it fungal? So you can always do cytology. And cytology is a great way to get a presumptive diagnosis. And sometimes you can get a complete diagnosis. You don't need anything else. But usually when you're sending the tissue off for histology, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and do like a fine needle aspirate and put it on a slide and give it to a clinical pathologist. Or look at it yourself. Even down in necropsy, frequently we'll do impression smears and we'll look under the microscope and sometimes we'll have a diagnosis, especially if it's infectious, like you can see the bacteria or the fungus or rule out neoplasm. So that's always a tool that you can use for quicker results. Because with histology, you have to fix the tissue for at least 24 hours, then you have to process the slide, and that takes 24 hours. So you usually don't get the slides until, 2 days after you took the mass. So. Okay, so this is an example of an anal sac adenoma. These are, looks like cuboidal to columnar epithelial cells. These look more columnar than these, so I think they're columnar. So you have these cuboidal to columnar epithelial cells forming a gland. And a gland is just the enclosed space. And glands are secretory. So anal sacs secrete anal sac fluid. I'm gonna say something about this. So this is benign. And the reason I could look at this and say this is benign is because the cells look absolutely normal. The cells look exactly as they would look if there was no tumor there. But the reason it's called a tumor is because it's actually forming a mass. It's excessive growth of these cells. So you have a neoplasm. Okay? And one of the other things you have to differentiate, which isn't always easy, is like hyperplasia from adenoma, benign hyperplasia. But usually it's now that's going to be kind of more based on, one, you use the gross clinical history, and also you look at the big picture of the cells. Are they really, really, really pushing and expanding, or are they just increasing number? But the good thing is either way it's benign. So hyperplasia is obviously benign, adenoma is benign. So you don't do too much damage if you're wrong, but you try not to be wrong. Yes?
So you said that this was excessive growth. Is it, so you're forming more glands, or